But the last video that I uploaded, the second section of the mini-series that I'm doing with author O'Neill Walters to spread awareness of domestic abuse and promote healthier relationships. That video was also on personality disorders. In the first video, I only went over the conditions that applied to the couple in Mr. Walters' book, The Empty Couple. I did not actually go over the entire range of disorders. So in this video, I'm not only going to be going over the ones that we did not cover in the first video, but I'm also going over a list of personality disorders that used to be diagnosable. They used to be in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders at one point, but now they're not technically diagnosable. However, there's still a lot of sources from experts,
academic articles, Psychology Today,
that actually do talk about these. You still do see these patterns and clusters of traits occurring together, and they are considered unhealthy patterns of looking at the world, of interacting with the world, of interacting with themselves. So I really feel like these are worth talking about. The point of going over this information is not necessarily to diagnose. It is to discern a general framework and understanding of what is healthy and what is not, what is okay and what is not. So consider this video a continuation of the last one. People with schizotypal personality disorder have what look like mild symptoms of schizophrenia, but unlike full-fledged schizophrenics, they retain their basic contact with reality. They are suspicious of other people's ulterior motives and therefore prefer to avoid social contact as much as possible. When in public, they feel uncomfortable, easily distracted, and limited in their range of emotions, and react with inappropriate emotions like smiling whenever they hear sad news. Their way of talking is odd, like abruptly jumping from one unrelated topic to another, or overly elaborate descriptions. This peculiar behavior may invite teasing and criticism, to which schizotypals are very sensitive. They often think coincidences hold some type of secret meaning just for them, like finding out that a bank that they had just been in yesterday had been robbed. They have illusions that are not quite to the full extent of hallucinations, like seeing faces in the ripples of water. Beliefs in magical thinking, such as thinking that they become a spirit once a year, can dominate their interpretation of reality. Though if these supernatural beliefs are a part of their culture or their religion, this is not considered a symptom of this disorder. The defining features of schizoid personality disorder are persistent lack of interest in relationships, a limited range of emotional expression, and barely, if any, joy from family, friends, and sex. Other people's opinions of them, whether praise or criticism, means nothing to them. But the few times they actually are comfortable enough to share their feelings, they often do talk about pain related to social experiences. Since they struggle with intimate relationships, they normally seek solitary jobs. Now, those with histrionic personality disorder are, in a word, dramatic. Their emotions swing quickly and extremely. They want nothing more than for other people to reassure them and fuss over them. Melodramatic behavior and flamboyant emotional displays help them draw attention to themselves. Their shallow calls for attention normally repel a lot of people in their lives. The relationships they do keep tend to be pretty unstable. Their doctors see them coming in pretty frequently complaining of very exaggerated medical issues. Histrionics place too much trust in authority figures like teachers, doctors, and even celebrities. Now, you've likely heard of obsessive-compulsive disorder, but you may not know that there is an obsessive-compulsive personality disorder too. Like the classic disorder, the personality disorder refers to an abnormally inflexible, nitpicky, authoritarian, compulsive, and calculating mentality. They obsess over regulations, details, and order, stubbornly refusing to let themselves or anyone around them fall short of their expectations. But in the classic disorder, these compulsions and obsessions revolve around particular aspects of life, such as arranging objects, constant hand washing to avoid germs, or checking switches and knobs repeatedly to ensure that they're off. In OCPD, the strict devotion to order applies to nearly every aspect of life. Despite a devotion to efficiency, their nitpicking actually keeps them from finishing tasks or trying new methods of succeeding instead of their current one. Their often fragile self-confidence depends on their ability to meet unreasonable requests they put on themselves. And since their perfectionism sabotages success, it can easily spiral into a never-ending cycle of failure and despair. Not surprisingly, these symptoms can stress relationships. They see other shortcomings, blunders, and quirks as insufferable. Those with OCPD normally appear stiff, serious, and cold. Okay, now we're getting into the conditions that are not technically diagnosable, but are still worth talking about because they do commonly occur in people's mindsets and interactions with the world. People with passive-aggressive personality disorder prefer to express hard feelings through hints and subtle messages than addressing them directly. Unlike just shy individuals who may hint out of fear too, passive-aggressives often hint or remark with an undercurrent of hostility. This method of communicating does not address problems effectively. In fact, it doesn't even end there. Passive-aggressives often do things others don't want them to do out of spite, such as procrastinating on tasks, babying their loved ones, or doing nice things, but for the purpose of making another person owe them something in return. If someone does pick up on these mind games and attempts to break away, then the passive-aggressive may turn it around and act like the innocent victim. These dynamics are so difficult to stop. Even if a passive-aggressive ends up in therapy, he or she can sometimes even trick the therapist into thinking that he or she is the victim and into becoming an unwitting accomplice to the unhealthy behavior. Depressive personality disorder is, you guessed it, a continuous depressed mood and appearance. People with this condition are emotionally fragile and prone to mood disorder, like major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety. They're quite likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. The primary symptom of negativistic personality disorder is an unending and extreme negative outlook on life, even if their circumstances give no reason for these bad feelings. These people can always find the downside of everyone and everything, and they normally give off a hostile vibe as well, which makes them no easier to get along with. Now, people with sadistic personality disorder take out their anger and stress on everyone around them, especially family members and pets. Abusing others, especially those who can't or won't fight back, helps ease their stress and establish their dominance. They even take pleasure from seeing the pain they inflict. Abusing and humiliating others also helps them restrict activities of those around them and helps them get others to comply with their wishes. Now, this one is just like it sounds. Persons suffering with masochistic, self-defeating personality disorder constantly harm themselves, which could be physical harm, like cutting themselves, or it could be circumstantial harm, like purposely sabotaging good opportunities. The bad news is personality disorders are extremely difficult to cure. The good news is the reason why they are difficult to cure is because most people don't realize that there's a problem in what they have. For some of these disorders, yeah, someone can obviously look at themselves and be like, okay, I don't like living like this. But for some of the ones that, say we went over last time, narcissistic, antisocial, things like that, where interacting with the world in a very selfish manner, but it's not hurting them any, at least that they can see, of course. They're not really motivated to change. The reason why therapy does not work for people is because they are not motivated to change. They think that the therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever the case may be, whoever they're seeing, is the one responsible for changing them. And it does not work that way. The therapist can show you the way, but you've got to walk it. That is how it works. And if you have any of these conditions that are really impacting your lives, I highly recommend that you do get therapy, you do seek out a professional. It's going to be an uphill battle, and it's going to be a lot harder and a lot longer if you do it yourself. But I know that not everyone can afford to go get therapy. If that is not an option for you, having a good support system helps. Friends, family who are supportive, who are loving, who really care about you. And minimize your contact with toxic people as much as you can. Be willing to put forth the effort. Really think about what you think about. That's actually some of the best advice I've ever been given from my history teacher back in high school. Being mindful of yourself and what goes through your head and how you're interacting and why you're interacting the way that you are, why you're interacting with yourself. This is powerful. This is so powerful to understanding why you're doing what you're doing. I mean, even if you don't have a problem, that's still healthy to do.
Always good.
Those are just a few items off the top of my head that I would advise if you can't get therapy. And I feel kind of wrong giving you those tips because ideally I do want you to go see a professional, someone who can really help you. But the reason why I felt like I ought to give you something to go off of is because I've been there. Growing up, I have never had professional therapy. My parents were always against therapy. I should say they were always against the price of therapy. I've never been officially diagnosed because, like I just said, I've never been to therapy. But I have so many traits of avoidant personality disorder. I advise you to go watch the video that I just posted to see all of the symptoms. I had a lot of them. I was always embarrassed of looking silly. I was always embarrassed about being criticized and so low self-esteem all the time. And I would just avoid people. Now, don't get me wrong, I did have friends, even though I was like so tense and so petrified to talk to people. If you had known me whenever I was younger, I was just a mess. Like, I would not talk to you. If you talked to me, I would not talk to you. I was just so fearful of being myself. And I was so fearful of having a voice. And I always felt like I was going to be criticized. I had to normally have somebody approach me first, and even after they approached me, I would be so scared to talk. And I didn't like living that way. And it was really, really hard to finally learn to find my voice and learn to trust. Not fear rejection the way that I used to. I always felt worthless. Like any love that I got, I didn't deserve. And that if people hung around me long enough, eventually they would walk out. The thing is, that happens. But I know at this point in my life, I can't always fear other people walking out on me. That's not the way that I want to live. I don't want fear of loss to keep me afraid of gain and to blind and separate me from the people who really want to be around me. I can tell you that I wish that I had had therapy. I wish, one, I knew if I was actually diagnosable for it. The only reason why I found out and began to suspect that maybe I had a problem like this, earning my bachelor's degree, I took the abnormal psychology class where I learned all this information. We learned about avoidant, and I was like, oh my goodness. And that was my tip-off that maybe I've got something besides just being shy. Like, I knew about social anxiety, but I didn't know about avoidant personality disorder. Social anxiety and avoidant personality disorder are flip sides of the same coin, or at least that's how a lot of experts in the mental health field consider these two conditions. I don't know if it was social anxiety because it was really crippling whenever I was younger. I lived in fear a lot. What finally turned it around for me, I had a small group in elementary school into middle school. 4 main people that I hung out with. Now, after the 7th grade, one of my friends switched schools. Another one moved. Well, actually started living with her aunt. Another one left halfway through 8th grade year, and I knew that one of my other friends was going to be moving after the 8th grade, and I was going to be going into high school with
nobody.
8th grade year, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go meet people, start saying what's on my mind, and yes, I said a lot of embarrassing things. I don't want to go into that right now. I said a lot of stupid things just trying to get myself to say something, and yes, it was embarrassing, but I think it did help desensitize me. I had this mindset,
Oh, it's gonna be so horrible to be embarrassed.
and it was, but it wasn't as horrible as I thought. It did not kill me. It was not fatal to be embarrassed, and eventually I learned that it's okay to say something embarrassing every now and then.
You know, not that I want to do it.
But being not afraid of being embarrassed is the first key, finally taking the reins on being able to communicate better, which I eventually got to where I could. So, It took a lot of pushing to finally get out of my shell. You know, in some cases I approached people who didn't want to be around me, but I think just the act of getting myself to take that risk, good or bad results, was what really made the difference. And all through high school, I was building that skill. I don't feel like I got it really down pat, really comfortable, really confident. And even now, don't get me wrong, I'm not all that confident. Like, I still get like anxiety. I still have like making eye contact with strangers and not feeling awkward about that. I still get that. But as far as generally being able to communicate in a healthy manner and I'm not afraid anymore, I didn't hit that point until I was probably my sophomore year of college. So I was about 19, 20 before I really felt like I could look back on the progress that I had made and go,
Wow, I've really come a long way.
I hope I don't come over as bragging, but I've had people say that I'm a really good communicator and that I seem very confident and I'm very perky and energetic whenever I talk, and I'm like, I know, I've got a long way to go. I am not done. I am a work in progress, and I always will be. Just being up to the level of what other people I saw in elementary school and middle school doing was progress from where I started out, because I started out so much farther behind in my communication and social skills. If you meet me in person, I am going to be one of the most socially awkward people. But at this point, you know what? I've accepted that. But my point in all this, one, I want to reassure you, it is possible to do it on your own. I don't want you to feel like you are just hopeless and sinking if you can't get professional therapy. It's ideal and I recommend it if at all possible, but I don't want you to feel like it's hopeless if you can't. But also another reason that I tell you all this from my personal experience. In the last video, I just went over scientifically supported information, and that's great. And I wanted you to have a very cut and dry version of what exactly this stuff looks like. I didn't want there to be any possibility of confusing my personal experience from what science said. That was good for that video. But I also felt at some point that I wanted to talk about this with you guys. There is a stigma to having disorders. I really don't think there ought to be that stigma. And if there's anything that I can do to lessen that stigma, help other people feel more confident and more comfortable, then I want to do that. So I'm not going to try to force anyone watching this to start coming out of their shell. That's not my place. That's your choice, and that should always be your choice. But I do hope that by sharing my own experience and showing what I've been through, I am one of the weakest, most sensitive people I know. I really am. And if I can do it, that means you can do it. I'm hoping that by sharing my own experience, it will give you confidence, and it will give you strength, and it will give you courage, and it's possible to get through it. There's always hope. You don't have to be the way that you are now if you don't want to be. I remember growing up, I heard that
Nobody truly changes. People don't really change.
and maybe in some respects of that, that's true, but we're not going to dissect that. That is a complex topic for another day. But I can tell you, if you have something that you're living with that you don't want to have, change that. And I hope you realize, even if you can't go out and get professional therapy, it doesn't mean there's no hope. You do not have to go through life struggling with the same thing that you've always struggled with. It's going to be a hard journey. It's going to take a lot of effort. I do not deny this. But I can tell you that it is going to be worthwhile. For now, I should go, but I will wish you a beautiful life and a healthier, happier mind. Bye-bye!